Hello and welcome to your introduction to the visual system. I just want to say right off the bat, you don't have to know anything that I am about to share with you for the vision drills that we do to make sense. And hopefully you will find some of them that are so powerful that you're just like, of course I'm going to do this drill. It makes me awesome. Or, oh my goodness, clearly there's something going on with this neuro skill and I need to work on this. And hopefully that is enough oomph for you to do the drills. And I, for one, love the big picture, and it helps me kind of understand why we're doing these drills, not just from the perspective of, yes, vision is important, but because it's going to impact just about everything related to being alive. So my key takeaway for you from watching this video is just this. The visual system impacts everything. If we improve the visual system, we can improve just about everything, and vice versa. If I improve my movement, if I improve my breathing, if I improve just about anything, I can also have a positive impact on my visual system. So again, the visual system is your dominant system. They say 70 to 90% of sensory input coming in comes through the visual system. That is not proven. It makes sense. Those numbers land, right? Like a huge amount of the information we need to move through the world comes from our eyes, right? All you have to do is close your eyes and do you want to walk? No. So it is a big, big deal and worth paying attention to. Okay, so let's just take a look at a few things. I want to look at the anatomy of the eye, just so you know, I like learning these things. Again, you don't have to know any of this. I'm going to talk about the anatomy of the visual system, and I'm going to talk about the different parts of the brain that the visual system impacts that are important to the work we do in neuroperformance coaching, and I'll talk about why. Again, you don't have to memorize any of this. I just want you to see it once so that when we're doing these drills, you have some context for where they fit into goals and tailoring this to your needs. Okay, so this is an eyeball. I have heard it said that the eyeball is the second most complex organ in our body, to the brain being the first one. It has over 2 million working parts. We will not be discussing all 2 million of them because I don't know what they are. But these that I'm going to talk about are the ones we hear often, and so I just want to make sure you know what they are. So the cornea is this outside surface of the eye. It's clear, and its job is to help bend light to help focus it onto the retina. We have the iris, that's the colored part of the eye that we see. This controls how much light enters through the pupil. We have the lens. It is responsible for focusing that light. So when we're thinking about acuity, how clearly can I see, we're talking about the lens, right? And specifically its ability to adapt to changes in distance. So we'll be doing drills that deal with near far and playing with that accommodation. Then down here we have the retina. This contains, I put this number in because I want you to see how big it is, 130 million photoreceptors. Those are your rods and your cones that are there to convert the light waves that come in to our eye into electric signals that then get passed via the optic nerve into the visual cortex. So 130 million photoreceptors. That's huge, right? A ton of real estate in the brain just for our photoreceptors. The optic nerve has 1,200,000 axons that transport these signals to the brain. So again, huge amount of neural real estate just in the eyeball and the optic nerve. So it makes sense that the brain pays an immense amount of attention to our eyes if it's devoted this much real estate to sight. Okay, so now let's take a look at the anatomy of the visual system. The optic chiasm I am highlighting here for one reason. There is one piece of vision that not all of us are aware of, and I think is really cool. We won't play so much with this in this particular course, but vision doesn't just come from the left eye and the right eye. It does do that as well, but we actually have like hemifields in our vision. If that's the technical term to mean our vision is split down the center, and light that is coming from my left side actually will cross over via this optic chiasm to my right visual cortex, and vice versa. Light that's coming in from my right side crosses over or decussates to the left visual cortex. So each eye is getting information from the world around us and sending it to the opposite side of the brain. There's a number of reasons for this, but one of the coolest things about neurology when you start to look at it is how redundant it is. We have so many different pathways that do similar things, largely because life is a full contact sport, things get injured, right? We want to make sure that we have as much possible hope of keeping vision alive, right? This is one example of that. I just think that's fairly fascinating. And again, we can play with this. I do play with this if I want to target specific halves of the brain. We won't be doing that in this course though. Next up, we have the lateral geniculate nucleus. Big word, don't worry about it. It lives in the thalamus. And the reason I want to call attention to this, the thalamus is your gatekeeper of sensory information being brought to consciousness. So for those of you who identify as highly sensitive, one of the things I might want to look at is thalamic re-education, training the thalamus so that we get clearer, more intentional signaling coming into consciousness from our body. And any issues we have with the thalamus can have really big impacts on visual processing. So it goes both ways. And just to tie this in, one of the best ways to retrain the thalamus is actually by cleaning up movement. So if you're wondering why I have all of these proprioceptive drills in, right, our motor control drills, the joint mobilizations, it is for this reason. We are re-educating the thalamus every time we improve our ability to move a joint. So I can improve my movement and therefore improve that thalamus and therefore improve my vision. I mean, so cool, right? So I'm just putting that in there to kind of tie a pretty bow around my choices for the drills in this workshop and why we might want to play with them. Next up is the midbrain. I talk about the midbrain a lot, and there's a few reasons. One, a lot of people that come to work with me are here for ADHD, anxiety and depression, and the midbrain plays a huge role in hyperactivity, theoretically, and hypersensitivity. So it's the start of the sympathetic nervous system, so fight or flight. And so just wanting to call this out, the eyes, there are two cranial nerves, cranial nerve 3 and 4, which I'll be discussing in another video, connect into the midbrain. So when we're doing vision training, we are activating this midbrain. And if our eyes are not working, optimally, the midbrain will be impacted by that. So if we're looking to balance out sympathetic, parasympathetic tone, yes, I'm going to be looking at the eyes to play a huge role in that. Also, activating the midbrain can have an impact on how well our eyes move, right? Everything in here goes both ways. So this is why I bring in colors first, because if we can find an activation, with red or blue, or a quieting with the green for the midbrain, then there's a chance we're going to improve our ability to do these vision drills right out of the gate. And that's awesome. So that is why that gets pulled in there, is to target this midbrain. And then from a vision perspective, just so you know, it's the midbrain is responsible for pupillary reflex, the dilation of our pupils, our accommodation reflex, that ability of the lens to shift based on distance, and the stereoscopic mapping, so three-dimensional, our ability to see in 3D and process that depth perception, right? And then finally, this information comes into the visual cortex, which is in the back of the brain. This is where we integrate the data from the left and right eyes, and then it gets sent to other brain regions for additional processing. So the visual cortex back here, when we're working neck, right? Jaw, even to some degree, we're going to be playing with the anatomy back here. Very, very powerful to make sure this area is moving well and functioning as optimally as possible. Okay, so like I just said, the information comes into the visual cortex and then it gets sent out to various parts of the brain for further processing. I have read that somewhere between 25 and 35 different parts of the brain will light up when we give someone a visual task, if we're looking at it on a functional MRI. That's amazing. So the takeaway message of this is vision impacts like the whole brain. And we can actually use this to target specific parts of the brain to improve our movement towards our own personal goals. So I want to just talk a little bit about the different parts of the brain that I think about when we're doing vision training, so that you can maybe have a bigger sense of the big picture here. So first and foremost, the frontal cortex, also the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. This is the home of executive function. So for those of you who are here for ADHD, hello, vision training. So yes, and specifically we're looking at planning, initiation, and even inhibition, stopping movements of the eyes, as well as, generally speaking as well. So that is, a huge bolus of information coming into that super important part of the brain for those of us trying to work on focus, concentration, self-control, and even a little bit of short-term memory. Next up, we have the parietal lobe. So this is the part of the brain that deals with spatial awareness. It's also where our sensory cortex lives. So any sensory information gets sent to the parietal lobe for processing. But from a visual perspective, this is sort of the where is it question that gets asked. Like, I'm looking at something, where is it? That is getting processed in the parietal lobe. So again, I can improve my senses, my touch receptors, even taste and some of the higher order senses will improve parietal function, or at least activate parietal function. And the more we activate that parietal lobe, the better the chances are of us understanding where things are spatially. Really cool, right? And of course, vice versa. I can use specific vision drills that I know will impact the parietal lobe and help wake up or clean up blurry sensory maps in the body. Are you amazed yet? Because even just saying this for the 14th time, I'm like, this is so freaking cool. Okay, next up we have the temporal lobe. This is the part of the brain where memory lives and also auditory processing. So this is sort of what we say, like if you see something, you're able to name what it is from a visual perspective. That also, holds true for longer term memory. So I play with that a lot in terms of improving memory. Looking at something and naming it can have an impact on that. So pretty cool there. Next, we have the vestibular complex. Hopefully by the end of these 8 weeks, you will be so sure that the visual system and the vestibular system are in fact very closely connected. But you can see that there in the darker gray area on the brain. We also impact the cerebellum. There are specific vision drills I will use just to target the cerebellum, but accuracy, balance, and control of vision, right? We are error correcting with our vision, and in doing so, we are activating the cerebellum, and again, vice versa. The more you activate the cerebellum, the better your ability to control your eyes becomes. The brainstem, the brainstem, in terms of, the simplest description of this for this class, brainstem is responsible for stability on the side of the brain that we're talking about. So the left brainstem will control stability through the left side of my body. We're talking autonomics on that side of the body, blood pressure, and all of those things that we discussed a little bit more in the vestibular lecture as well. And then also super important, the brainstem is responsible for gating pain. So how loud is that pain signal? Am I getting a pain signal? That's coming from the brainstem. So if we're looking to quiet chronic pain, and I know that vision training is going to impact that brainstem, I'm going to be looking at how I can play with the eyes to impact pain. The eyes also are deeply connected to the insular cortex. And I talk about interoception ad nauseum in the work that I do, especially for those of you who are dealing with anxiety, depression, hypersensitivity, performance anxiety, right? It's the seat of the self is how I language it. It's my ability to feel myself. And it is, trainable, which is just so cool. And one of the ways that we do that is by working on the visual system. because the insular cortex integrates all of our senses, and because vision is, the biggest of those senses, it makes sense that vision training would have an impact on interoception, and vice versa, which is why I highly recommend getting that ab belt to try if you are prone to any kind of visual issues. So having that heat and pressure on the belly, I'll talk about this more in the interoception lecture, but having that on the belly sends a signal up the vagus nerve to the insular cortex, and that can help improve our ability to do these vision drills. And then finally, the basal ganglia. This could get discussed more with the frontal cortex and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, because there is a deep conversation there. They're connected. But if you're in my ADHD Brain Boost, I kind of pulled this one out a little bit more. Also, if you're a musician, basal ganglia is responsible for rhythm, and it's where we integrate voluntary and reflexive movement. So really fascinating part of the brain. And certainly when we're talking about grace, elegance of movement, rhythmic movement, there's a cerebellar piece to that, but it's a piece of the brain I'm totally fascinated by and can have a huge impact. Certainly for people with ADHD, it's one that is impacted. So or is often impacted. So really cool to be able to train that. And it is why I will add in rhythm to vision drills, because sometimes that can help improve the way we do those drills. So tying that all together there, really, really cool. So I hope that this discussion of the parts of the brain just lights you up and gets you excited, because yes, we can use vision training for just about anything that we want to improve. Really, really cool. Okay, so how do we do vision training? We just talked about how amazing it is for everything. What is vision training? So what is it that we're actually trying to improve? So basically, I want to talk about the different visual skills that we should just inherently be good at, but because we all live in boxes and stare at screens, and then we age on top of it, and there's injury, right? We're not. Most of us have some kind of functional deficits in one or all of these visual skills. For most of us, there's room for improvement, which is really, really exciting. So I just want to walk through these. The one that we're going to spend the most time on in this class is eye movements, right? Our ability to move our eyes in different ways. We're going to look at fixations or gaze stabilization, staring at an object, our ability to focus on that object and not waver in all 9 positions, which I'll talk about in a minute. Smooth pursuits or tracking, gaze tracking, be able to watch an object in motion without our head moving. Saccades are eye jumps, being able to shift my focus from one target to another in all kinds of different ranges. Vergence and convergence. So vergence, we've got convergence and divergence, the ability to look at something up close and look at something far away. We're going to look at that. The vestibulo-ocular reflex, or VOR, starts to work with the connection between the vestibular system and the visual system. We have a reflex that helps us keep our eyes on a target while we are in movement. And it's a really powerful and really important skill. Makes sense, right? To be able to see things clearly while you're moving. We're going to train that. VOR cancellation is actually the ability to cancel that and actually have your eyes and head or body move at the same speed. And the last one on this list is OKN, optokinetic reflex. We're not going to play with that in this workshop, but there is I'm putting it there for those of you who want the complete big picture that's also in there. And I do use it a lot with private clients to play reflexively. The next visual skill is probably the one most of us think about, which is acuity, right? When we think vision, we think about how clearly can I see that Snellen chart? How easy is it for me to read? That is a visual skill. And part of the reason I have the brain pens in the pack is so that you can include acuity with the training of the eye movements. How clear can I keep this target while I'm moving? Just to say, We can focus on focus, right? The acuity piece, or we can let it go. We can just work on speed, we can work on the musculature, or we can work in combination. So I'll make suggestions on that. We'll play with that in the course, but it's its own separate skill, right? And we may want to combine skills. Depth perception. We're not going to play a ton with depth perception in this class, other than with the Brock string. So that Brock string, right, the beads on the rope, is giving me information about where I actually am looking. Am I actually looking at my target? And do I have images coming from both eyes in order to do that? So that will help clean up depth perception. But there's a whole lot more we can play with in this area. Come back for more. And then peripheral awareness, we will touch on in this workshop as well. Peripheral vision, super important. And the connections to movement with peripheral vision are really fascinating. I could talk for hours on peripheral vision. I think it's super fascinating. I won't at this point. So those are the visual skills. And I want to come back and talk about eye movements a little bit more in depth, because, 6 of the skills we're going to look at in this workshop are in fact movements. And so I want to talk about this in a little bit more detail. I'll bring it up every time we do a drill, but I want you to look at the muscles of the eyes here. And I don't want you to memorize them. I just want you to know that you have muscles that move your eyes. And just like your glutes or your abs, if you don't train them, if you don't use them regularly, they atrophy. And here's the thing, if my glutes atrophy, okay, I have a flabby butt, right? Maybe my gait, has a problem. Maybe I have pain, right? You want that toned. But with the eyes, if we have the superior rectus, if that atrophies and becomes weak or tight, we can end up with all kinds of problems, right? The visual system, dominant system impacts everything. Not having optimally healthy musculature of the eyes can be a precursor to you name it, right? The flip side of that is, if we can strengthen those muscles, if we can make them more flexible and agile, everything improves. So get to know these eye muscles. Again, I don't care if you know what the names are, but knowing that they're there and kind of knowing what they do so that you have the ability to make sure you are getting regular maintenance for these muscles is super important. And don't worry, by the end of the 8 weeks, you will know how to train these muscles. We're going to hit repeat on the protocol over and over and over again. In fact, in your folder, you have this VOR chart, right, that has the 8 different directions coming off of the center spot there. The reason we have this in here is because we're going to think about this with just about every visual skill, visual movement that we do. So, and the reason is exactly what you see in this picture here, right? These different muscles pull the eyes horizontally and on diagonals, and then in combination vertically, okay? So again, you don't need to know the anatomy, but you do need to know those directions so that when you're out in the world, beyond here, especially, right, these diagonals, a lot of us, maybe you live in New York City and you're looking up at buildings a lot. Maybe you stare at the ground, right? Left and right, we get a little bit, maybe more of that, but the diagonals, like when was the last time you did that? Unless you're playing baseball or you're a bird watcher, right? A lot of us need more 3-dimensional movement of the eyes and of our, body generally. So we're going to move the eyes in all these different ways in these different 9 directions. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, I'm going to talk about this ad nauseum through our time together, but big picture, this is why we're going to do a different visual skill every week. It is, to me, the primary differentiator between neuroperformance coaching and just about any other modality is the inclusion of the visual system. And because it is so important, like we need to train this. So from a fundamental perspective, I want to make sure we are covering our bases with this and using the sensory work, the movement work, right, which could be game-changing for you and your goals in and of itself. But we're also using those to enhance our visual training. So super cool topic, obviously very complicated. Again, you don't have to know any of this. We just have to train our eyes and the world will improve. But this is the why behind it, if that is of interest to you. And again, if you have any questions on any of this, please ask. And yeah, I'm super excited to jump into vision training with you.